Cool. Well, great to be with you, Harshada.
Yeah.
How are you, for starters?
I'm good. Are we on?
We're on. We're live.
Okay.
Let's go.
Yeah, I'm good. It's an interesting season in my life. I've got a lot going on. I also have 2 kids like you do. And boy, how are you has so many different layers to it. And right now, all the layers, I would say, pretty good.
Yeah, I feel you on that. When I ask my friends in India, how are you?
Yeah.
They often don't have an answer. It's like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? Like, we're here. Like, what the hell? I'm good. I'm bad. I'm happy. I'm sad. I'm everything. So it is a loaded question to answer fully honestly, isn't it?
Yeah. I just realized, this is one of those, and this kind of gets right into the yoga work too, where, I don't know, I was just up and getting the kids to school, and then I was doing the next thing, and then I was doing a consultation over the phone in the car, and then I was doing a video talk in the car, and then I'm here and I'm finding my way here, and then I'm visiting with your family, and then it's like, oh yeah, how am I? what am I?
How are you right now?
That was why the question kind of like stunned me or something.
Yeah.
It was like
Be here now. Which brings me to Ram Dass was one of your first introductions to this path, was he not?
Yeah. It was definitely the first introduction to Eastern thought into the yoga path and all of the teachings that come from the yoga path and the idea of the guru and sadhana and, all of those things, were introduced to me from Ram Dass, from his book, Be Here Now. And then later, when I was apprenticing as a yoga teacher in Chicago with Gabriel Halpern at the Yoga Circle, I just got to give him a shout out because he's still there. And he's probably like one of the best asana teachers in the world and like a very unsung hero. Anyway,
Repeat his name?
Gabriel Halpern.
Okay.
And he's a master of Iyengar therapeutics. And unlike many master teachers in the Iyengar world, no offense, he's super nice. And he's very funny and he's super cuddly, like dad kind of a person. But he's also a master, especially with therapeutics. Anyway, when I was apprenticing with him a million years ago, he had the entire Ram Dass tape library in his lending library. And I probably listened to the whole thing over those years. And they were just cassette tapes. They were just all these stacks of cassette tapes of him giving talks. And, that's how I learned the Bhagavad Gita the first time, was from his Bhagavad Gita course, and just so many things. So yeah, Ram Dass is a huge influence, especially in the really early days. Yeah.
Beautiful. And can you talk in depth as you like about your whole path? I know you in your teens, similar to myself, you would describe it as kind of punk days, rebellion days, which I can totally relate to. And can you kind of speak from that period, your kind of upbringing, to then what led you onto the path you're on right now?
Yeah. Well, we're talking about 30 years. So luckily I don't have to give a whole minute for every year. But yeah, I grew up in a family. I was in the middle of America in a relatively small town called Peoria, Illinois. And I grew up in a family where everyone was pretty checked out and drunk and kind of suffering in their own way. And I was kind of left on my own, you could say. I didn't have a particularly hard time. I wasn't beat up or abused or, we didn't go hungry or anything like that. But I became a juvenile delinquent, you could say, at an early age. I was a very unhappy kid and got into drugs and alcohol at a very young age in a pretty serious way. And so by the time I was 16, going on 17, I got sober and went to 12-step program, went to AA in those days. And it was there that I first got introduced to spiritual path work.
Did you go voluntarily at 16, 17?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, I did. Well, sort of. I mean, it depends. From a mystical point of view,
Right.
not. But no, what happened was I had a girlfriend at the time, and she actually factors into the story. And she was really bad. She was even worse than me in some ways. And she got busted and put into a rehab. And this is like 1987, 1988. And rehabs for teenagers were just becoming a thing then. And so she got put into a rehab, and in order to visit her, I would go to these public AA meetings and like sneak her cigarettes and, pretend like I was there for the meeting, but really be there to visit her. And somehow it just stuck. It was like a combination of seeing sober people who were like, they weren't like uncool or like square, but at the same time, they had this spiritual light about them, and they were doing something good with their life, helping other people. And I don't even know, Stuart, like I woke up like 6 weeks later and I was sober. It was kind of like that. And I was good at it. I was good at doing the spiritual work, you could say. And at the same time, that same girlfriend, her dad, Norm Jager, was a Christian pastor. And before I was sober, he was just this big, scary Christian pastor dad of my hot girlfriend. And you can imagine what that's like. But then after I got sober and I started looking for God myself, I started looking at him and kind of seeing him and seeing that he was actually a really righteous dude. And just to talk about his ministry for a second, because it relates to me in a big way now. He had quit the church, quit the sort of formal church, and with a few of his friends started a small ministry that was ministering to disabled people with Down syndrome and developmental disabilities and birth defects and so on and so forth. And because he saw Christ's main teaching as do unto others, and as you do to the least among us, so you do unto me. So their thing was just all about serving people who were suffering. And they all had regular jobs. They never took any money from their ministry. And I started volunteering with them and doing that work with those people, as well as going to AA and doing the 12-step work. And that had a huge impact on me, because in my heart, I think I was cast to be someone who is a spiritual person, and obviously someone who's some kind of a vehicle for spirituality for others too. And until I had that piece, I was just suffering. It was like the drugs and alcohol. That's what I needed if I didn't have that. But then as soon as I found that, I found this huge missing piece. And, this is, Illinois in the 80s. So there was this Christian ministry, this disabled ministry, and there was AA. And it was in AA that someone gave me Be Here Now. And so I kind of was self-taught a little bit, just using that book, and started to meditate and started to do some of the practices that Ram Dass talked about in there. I was doing the service work with the Christian ministry, and I was doing the deep digging work with the AA. And eventually I went off to college in Chicago, and that's where I got more seriously into more formal training in yoga with Gabriel, as I said, but also became a student of inner yoga and found a guru and went to India and decided instead of doing graduate school, I would just throw myself wholeheartedly into my own spiritual training, and just really never looked back. I did that sort of work in that formal ashram context for about 10 years. And then when I was living in New York City, I started teaching on my own. And what I'm doing now is kind of an evolution of that.
Thank you for sharing.
That was a pretty short synopsis, I think.
No, I'm sure we can pick it apart as we keep going. But yeah, thank you for sharing. I love how you're bringing the conversation back to God, the word God. I mean, it seems like
yes, God.
It became so loaded. It became so loaded kind of for our generation. And I know for myself, when I teach a class, up until very recently, and through your conversations as well about God, that has helped me be able to say it again. Because for so long, I couldn't. I would feel inhibited with it. I would feel just something cloaking it. Like, I don't know if it was from my just negative experiences of religion as a kid, being brought up with just a lot of, as a Jewish boy, but a lot of just forced kind of dogma, and there was a lot of anger there. And I just wasn't enjoying it, to be honest. But I kept hearing the word God. So I think there was residue of that. And then just the collective thing. I do recall even classes where I didn't quite say God, but it was the same kind of dialogue. I'd have some people every now and then coming up very negatively, saying like, I thought this wasn't religion, like you're speaking about God, and I thought this wasn't religion, like what the hell, and quite angry, negative. So I thank you for bringing that to the forefront again and helping refresh the word and our perception of it, because it seems there's work to be done there, even though it is just a word, but an important word, you know.
Yeah,
Can you speak to that?
It's been polluted. Yeah. I mean, when you say it's loaded, it's been loaded with a lot of crap. It's been polluted. And, you know, when I first started teaching yoga in, 1993 or 1994, yoga was still a pure word, and God was already a polluted word. And now yoga is becoming sufficiently polluted as a word. So now the God word is not any more polluted or confusing than saying yoga.
Joe and I often talk about it, as do a few other teacher friends. Like, we want to lately we've wanted to stop using the word yoga and bring in something else, but that doesn't do it either. Yeah. It's just a matter of time until that word becomes dirty or whatever.
I know. It's so funny. I realized that, many years ago that I wanted to just be a little bit more unbridled about talking about God in my teaching. It was actually something that Swami Chidvilasananda, who was my guru for many years, once said. That she said, if you're a public figure, you can say anything. You could say the most vile things, and no problem. Your reputation is intact. But if you publicly say, I love God, you're done. It's so true. Oh. And even people, that are these sort of evangelical leaders, that we have here in the U.S., they can talk about God, but if they were to go as far as to say, like, I love Jesus, or if they say that, I praise Jesus and dance in my underwear, they would be seen as crazy. But if they say that, Jesus told me to bomb this country, everybody would be like, yeah, that makes sense. It's so polluted. But, so I was teaching a workshop in Brooklyn, and the workshop wasn't even necessarily like related to this. I don't even remember what it was about. It was some kind of an inner yoga workshop, like on shame or something, if I recall correctly. But this was in my mind, this God thing. And I don't know, there were maybe 30 or 40 people there. And I just asked the group, how many people here are uncomfortable with the word God? Every hand in the room went up, pretty much. So then, I talked about it a little bit. And then I asked, okay, let me ask you this. You're in the car goes off the road. The car's crashed in the ditch. You're bleeding to death. No help is coming. You're going to die. How many people here are going to pray to God? And almost every hand in the room went up.
And even just instantly, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like we all do that.
Yeah. Exactly. And so I was like, okay, so the problem isn't with God. The problem is with the language. The problem is with the culture. And the problem is with the vehicle. And, we have this expression in American English. I don't know if you have this in Australia, but we say, you don't throw the baby away with the bathwater. Or you don't drain the baby with the bathwater. But the idea is that there is a baby and there is a bathwater. And the thing is that is the case with every single spiritual vehicle that is and that ever was. And it's really interesting, but there's a part in the Bible where Jesus is in the garden in Gethsemane, and he's waiting to be arrested. He's waiting to be arrested and then taken and tortured and crucified and all of that. And he already knew what was going to happen to him. And he left his disciples and he went off and he prayed by himself. It's a really deep passage. And he was praying to God, and he prayed, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. He said, like, God, if it's your will, take this vessel away from me. If it's your will. This vessel meaning the crucifixion. Like, if it's your will, I would really rather not be tortured and crucified right now. But he called it a vessel. I think that's one clue in the scripture. And then he said this famous thing where he said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Or the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. And I was thinking about this because, I've been investigating a lot of modern expressions of Christianity recently, including I went back to that disabled ministry just a couple weeks ago. I went home to my hometown and went back to that ministry. But anyway, so I've been looking at the Christian Bible and looking at these Christian teachings. And, in the Christian world, they call the church the body of Christ. That's what they call it. And whether every church is the body of Christ. And so when Jesus says this, he says the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. He's talking about his body. And so if you get really into the encoded teachings in that scripture, he's giving this clue that I have seen in every single spiritual path I've ever been a part of, that there's a baby and there's a bathwater. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. The preacher has a weakness. The guru has a weakness. The system has a weakness. The scripture has misinterpretations to it. The system has a pollution that happens to it, and also Vedanta teaches us that every body, everything that is born has 5 stages, right? So it's born, it has a youth, it has an old age, it has a very old age, and then it dies. Everything has these 5 stages. And so you could see this with like any vehicle for spiritual stuff too. That, there are things that are just born. There are things that are young and we've seen this in the yoga world, where there's like some movement like Anusara was for a second, that it was like this, horny, beautiful teenager, just like glowing with tejas and ojas, and, like it was in this moment of its youth. And then you can see, some of these older traditions that are like kind of in their old age, like you go to like a Vedanta society or something like that. And, a lot of the people there are old, but even if there's some young people there, the system itself, it has a geriatric feeling to it. There isn't a whole lot of life flowing through it. So, and like other bodies get polluted, bodies get sick, bodies get misused. And I think that, when people have that allergy to the God word, it's usually that they're experiencing some wisdom. Because, especially when we're talking about yoga people, because yoga by its very definition, we don't believe anything that we don't experience. That's what's the beautiful thing about it, is that we we don't have to believe in anything. So people have some kind of a legitimate connection to spirit, and maybe they want to call it God, but what they know of as God is this whole hypocritical, politically involved, corrupt, dead, half dead thing. And they're like, well, that can't be it. So instead, I'm going to call it the universe, or I'm going to call it the goddess, or I'm going to call it, my favorite word for it, whatever. So you can, because like even in yoga class,
go through it all.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. The universe or true self or whatever.
Totally. And so, but the thing is when you're dying on the side of the road, whatever is not what you want to come and help you. When you're a father and got 2 kids and you're trying to support them and you got all this uncertainty in your life and you need to bridge out beyond the personal to something that's greater than you. The universe, you have to be a deep, deep, deep mystical yogi to actually connect to the universe. That's usually an empty euphemism in my experience. So it's like people having some kind of, even if it's kind of dualistic, but this idea of like, God, help me. Grace. I like to talk about grace. Grace is a good word for me. Grace, help me. I need grace right now. I don't have the strength. I don't have the answers. I don't have the patience. I don't have the money. I don't know the way forward. Grace, you've always been with me. You've gotten me to this point. Help me. And it being something that is beyond you, I think is really such a gift for people, and something that I'm really passionate about helping people connect to in a way where they don't have to throw out their common sense, where they don't have to override their wisdom that does see hypocrisy and all of that pollution that you were talking about.
Yeah, that seems to be a big part of the new movement, the new conversation, is the autonomy that the teacher gives to the student. I think there is a residue of the old conversation of God in which it was an anthropomorphic figure that gave away everyone's autonomy. Believe me and do what I say, then you'll get into heaven. But what this new conversation is doing is giving the power right back, which is incredibly refreshing. I'd like to speak a bit about Jesus being a rebellious Jewish boy that was brought up by both a Jewish mom and a Christian dad. I enjoyed, and I still do, triggering my mom by bringing up the J word, the Jesus word. And I love Jesus and really connect to him. But in the mystical sense, in connecting, trying to connect with the mystical teachings that he brought forth, and reading works such as the Yoga of Jesus by Yogananda, and listening to Adyashanti's course on resurrecting Jesus really helped me, and your conversations really has helped me connect to a potential actuality of him, or even just the metaphor of his life. And I definitely do enjoy triggering my mum, though, and just jokingly bringing out my love for Jesus. And there's still a deep residue in that lineage of you're Jewish, you don't speak about Jesus. And then I talk about potentially him being a good Jewish boy himself. And it's such an interesting conversation. And your connection to Jesus. So you were brought up in Illinois, and there was the church and the Alcoholics Anonymous. Yet you've carried forth a deep love of Christ. Am I right?
Well, it's interesting, Stuart, but it's kind of like the last thing that has come in my spirituality. My father was Protestant. My mother was Catholic. My grandfather on my father's side was a Lutheran minister, actually. And they couldn't really agree on what they were going to raise the kids, Protestant or Catholic. So they just raised us all alcoholic. It was what they did.
The ultimate remedy.
Yeah. So those Christians at that disabled ministry did this incredible thing in those days where they didn't say anything to me. They didn't evangelize me in the sense of ever pressuring me to think about Jesus, read the Bible, anything. And, Norm, the main pastor, he would say stuff like, yeah, Dave, I know you think the universe or the God is this all pervasive force and Jesus doesn't matter. Well, you're wrong, but whatever, go get those boxes out of the van and, stop picking your nose. That was his Bob. And he never said anything. He just showed it. He just showed it through his love and just showed it through the way that he lived and the way that he took care of those people. So I wasn't interested in Jesus. I was interested in God. I wasn't interested in any formal thing until I got introduced to yoga and the Eastern teachings, and that turned me on. And, my guru would talk about Jesus sometimes, and that's fine. And there are a few great verses in the Bible that I've been teaching for many, many years that I think are fine. And then in this last season of my life, I have found myself returning to Jesus in a certain way. And not even returning, but like turning to Jesus. Because I've always been a non-dualist. In other words, everything is one consciousness. Tattvamasi, Aham Brahmasmi, Chaitanya Atma. All of these teachings that are about the all-pervasiveness of the universal force of God. But as I come into a kind of a seniority as a teacher, I've been teaching now for more than 25 years. And the thing is like, I was just telling someone, all of my colleagues, like you guys will teach in Bali and Costa Rica and have all these beautiful people in your retreats and stuff. And I'm always like in St. Louis and Northern Ireland and, like the men's work that I've done too. It's like, I've been called to minister to and to teach to people, that are in pain and that are in suffering. My whole career as a teacher, that's been kind of my catchment of students. And what I see is that, still I understand that non-dual reality is a truth on an ultimate level. But on the level that most of us live, we live in a dualistic reality. And so I don't mean to geek out on philosophy here.
No, please do.
But we live in this very dualistic reality.
For listeners that maybe haven't heard those terms, do you want to even dumb
so
it down?
Non-dualistic means everything is one, and dualistic means that everything
Separate.
is not one. In other words, there's polarities of good and evil and right and wrong and things that are sacred and things that are not sacred. Yoga teaches us Nitya Shri, Nitya Mangalam, which means everything is eternal, everything is eternally good and blessed, and it's just a matter of getting to that consciousness. Dualism teaches that we turn to God, and God is something that in a way is outside of us, or that there is a goodness that is on the other side of the badness that we're stuck in. So I don't know how personal we want to get here.
Keep going. Get personal.
So, I have a couple of small kids. My kids are 6 and 4 now. And when they were 4 and 2, their mom and I separated. And to say it became a difficult season in my life as a father is such an understatement. And what I found myself needing to turn to were teachings of radical forgiveness. And in a way, radical non-duality in a way. But looking at intense pain and being able to see through it. Looking at intense blame and resentment and being able to love despite it. And, not to cast any dispersions on my kid's mom. She's on her own path and she's a beautiful person. She's an amazing mother. But in any separation, there's a certain degree of contention. And when there's a separation that involves kids, it's just like one of the hardest things that people go through. And it's interesting because it's so common, but it's actually such a huge, tragic thing to move through. And in the face of that, I just found myself moving towards these teachings that were really Jesus teachings. Teachings like, forgive someone when they hurt you. We could just throw that away. It's such a common thing. If you grow up in the Western world, that teaching of like, love your enemy. But what I find is that, as a senior, you could say, or getting on senior spiritual practitioner, that's not just an obvious teaching. That is a top shelf teaching, to be able to be hurt and still love, and to be able to look at your own shortcomings or your own failures, and to be able to still have hope and not go into spiritual bypass, but actually have a spirituality that you can take into the pain. And that's what Jesus is. Even if you look at it biblically, like coming from the Old Testament, which is very good about describing God and his almighty power and his super duper holiness. Holy, holy, holy is the God Almighty. The Old Testament is really great at establishing that. And then in the New Testament, and the way that Christians read the Old Testament, was that was the setup then for God to go from this kind of untouchable, mighty place and descend through a human being into our filth and into our pain and into our mess, the mess of a man, the mess of a human being in life that suffered like the worst. That to me, whether you think of it historically, literally, or even like, not maybe metaphorically, but like, in Sanskrit, we have this word tattva, which means a principle. Like there's the Jesus tattva, like this principle of grace, this principle of like God's power touching humanity in our suffering and uprising us. And, my whole path has always been a path in Kundalini yoga. And I don't mean like the Yogi Bhajan white turban Kundalini yoga. I don't mean that. I just mean in the sense that all my masters were masters that talked about the awakening of Kundalini and looking at sadhana as the unfolding of that Kundalini power. And we have this term in that called Shaktipat, which is like it literally means the descent, like getting smacked with grace. Pat. Like grace comes down. And that's how I really understand the power of Jesus and the love of Jesus. And, this teaching that I first learned, as this like little punk kid when I was 16 of, how does that mercy then flow through us? And how do we love the unlovable? How do we see the unseeable? How do we bridge out of, and this is a huge thing in our yoga world, self-absorption, and because it's all about me, and I'm pointing to this yoga mat that's here next to us. It's like my whole situation is happening within this, 6-foot rubber mat. And I mean, there are, charitable projects and, teaching yoga to people is serving them in an amazing way in and of itself. But just saying that, like, when I look at the tribe of people that I am a leader within, I just see that we are a very self-absorbed tribe of people. And then I know that I'm like going off in this other thing.
No, keep going. I'd love to pick like every little gem apart, but I'll let you just keep going.
I'm about to start shouting here with the Holy Ghost in a second because I'm so stoked about this moment in my ministry, even though it's so uncertain. But so then I've been going to these different Christian things and like listening to these different Christian teachers. And I went and saw this woman, Joyce Meyer, Meyer, and you can look her up on YouTube and listen to her sermon. She's
Joyce, is that with a Y or an I?
With a Y, yep. And she's like one of these mega preacher people. You know, she's like 75 years old, and she has like a gazillion sermons on YouTube. And she's an incest survivor, very vocal about that, from the part of the country that I'm from. She talks with a twang from Missouri. And it's just this total like no bullshit, badass teacher, and is an amazing communicator too. Any of you that are any kind of communicator can learn something just from listening to the way she teaches. But anyway, I got really into her work, and then she was in San Jose recently, so I was like, I'm gonna go. And she was, you know, gonna be there in this big Christian band called Jesus Culture. Like Christian music is also this huge thing I never knew about before. But so Jesus Culture was going to be playing at Joyce Meyer, so I knew it was going to be big. So I go to this thing, and it's in an arena with 6,000 people, and it was great. I'm so glad I went. I learned so much from Joyce. I'm not totally crazy about the music yet. I feel the spirit and I like the message.
Neither am I.
Anyway, but the thing that touched me more than anything, Stuart, was in between the sessions, I would go and I would walk laps around this big oval around the arena on the outside, like where the concession stands and bathrooms and stuff like that are. It's like a big hockey arena kind of thing. And I can just say that it felt like Christ's energy was in my heart, in my eyes. And I was seeing all these people that were like his people, that were like, if there were 6,000 people there, you know, 3,000 of them were obese, like very obese. And, you know, hundreds and hundreds of them were like just limping for no apparent reason and just had no light, like no, for in the yoga language, no tejas. They were just so clearly unhealthy and unhappy. And, you know, they had a Bible in their hand and they were spending their weekend at this Christian thing. And they probably have their whole life revolving around their spirituality in a certain way, but it's not getting in. And all of a sudden it hit me that these people have something that my yoga tribe doesn't have, right? Because they have the idea of obedience to a spiritual path. We don't have any obedience. They have the idea of this transpersonal God and grace and all this kind of supernatural stuff that we only in the yoga world have like a little bit of a connection to. You know, we're afraid to even say the word God. These people have that. We don't have that. But we have something that these people don't. We know, you know, like, we know how to like drink water instead of soda. And, you know, we know how to like take care of our bodies, and we know how to still our minds. And it just broke my heart in the most beautiful way to be there and be among those people and just get this other calling where I just feel like God is really calling me right now to really bring this God work into the yoga world and bring this yoga and wellness awareness into this God world. Because, man, there are millions in our countries. Australia is a huge hotbed of modern Christianity. There's all kinds of really cool movements that come out of Australia and all kinds of really cool stuff happening here too. And, you know, if they just, and this sounds like a put down, but it's not. But if they just like drank water and went for a walk every day and sat quietly in meditation for 15 minutes before or after they prayed, their relationship with Jesus would just take off. Like they would know Jesus in a way that, right now is, maybe not getting down deep in them. Does that make sense?
Totally.
And, for the people, a lot of the people in our tribe, quite frankly, they are not comfortable with God because they haven't healed their father wound.
Yeah.
With their dad. So, the God, the Father, this almighty Father, this all powerful Father, you mean like I'm going to be like eternally unseen? You mean I'm going to be like shamed with like a power of like, all eternity? And I'll say one more thing and then I'll shut up. But
no, keep going.
You'll relate to this. And like I wasn't really ready to consider the idea of a sacred father, like a godfather, until I became a father. And I heard this thing, and I think actually Joyce Meyer was the pastor that said it, but she was like, we have all these beliefs that God is going to punish us and God is going to judge us and God is going to hurt us in some way. And she started talking about her husband, her kid's dad. And she said, when our kid is outside playing and the local bully gets him and he yells out for his dad, do you think his dad is going to check to see if he did his chores before he goes to help him? And he said, do you think that dad is not going to actually knock a door down if he has to get to him, to help him?
That's so great. That's well put, huh?
It's so well put.
Yeah.
I'm just like getting like chills just talking about it. And just like the tenderness that I have towards my kids as a father. And just imagining that on an infinite level, then it starts to make sense.
That's awesome.
When I think of the protection, when I think of that unconditional love, and there is a piece of it where, and I'm there to teach my kids too. I'm there to correct my kids too. I'm there to protect them from themselves as well as protect them from other things. And sometimes that means saying no. No is another one of those words we don't like to say.
Yeah, that's been a movement in the kind of spiritual yoga scene as well as parents. The no word was like put in the no category. You don't say no. What's your relationship with no?
Yeah, I mean, I think no is very important.
I agree.
I think no is important. I think that one more thing, and then I promise you I'll really
of course.
shut up. But like, this is like another piece of the medicine that I'm getting from the Judeo-Christian tradition for our moment in the yoga world. I was talking to this man that I work with when I was on my trip, and we were talking about this. We were talking about Chogyam Trungpa, the great Tibetan master, who's like one of the sharpest swords, one of the greatest minds. His book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, is required reading in my teacher training. And
Crazy Wisdom, have you?
Yeah,
have you watched that?
Yeah, watch Crazy Wisdom, and he hasn't watched Crazy Wisdom, and he only knows Trungpa from his books, and he doesn't know what a maniac Trungpa was as a human being. And like what a party animal and like hard drinker, he killed himself with alcoholism, and what what I don't even know what the word is. I don't want to like make it wrong, but he fucked everything that moved unabashedly. Like he didn't try to hide it, which is arguably better. But he lived in a way that like most spiritual seekers would really crash their spiritual practice if they lived in the way that he lived in the example that he showed. And I was talking about that, and he was really surprised about that. And all of a sudden it hit me that, Chogyam Trungpa aside, Osho also aside, because he was very open about his debaucherous way of living. In the East, all the teachers have to be perfect. Right? We have to be these perfect. There's even the thing of like the siddha, or the perfected master. And then if we're not, there's been so much, there's a whole Me Too movement that's happening in the spiritual world as well. And so then what happens is like these other Tibetan masters that get outed for being lecherous or being gnarly with money or whatever, then they're just done. They're just out. they're finished. And the same thing with the spiritual masters in India, the gurus, they have to project this image of like human perfection. And they have to put on an act. And if there's any crack in that act, then people are burning effigies of them in the street. That trickles down to you and I as spiritual teachers too, because that is the lineage that we're teaching in, is that Eastern lineage. But in the Judeo-Christian tradition, every prophet in the Bible, except for Jesus, and even arguably Jesus, was imperfect. All the prophets in the Old Testament were super imperfect, and we get to learn from their mistakes as much as we do from their triumphs. And I think that is so rad.
It's huge.
It's huge. Mm-hmm. It's huge because you and I know, as people that have some longevity on the path, it's, like somebody said, T. Harv Eker said, success is messy. Mm-hmm. It's not like this like straight line. It's like sawing through sheet metal. It's like you're in, you're out, you're on, you're off. You have seasons of victory and seasons of challenge and seasons of failure and seasons of all of that. And, online, we're always perfect. Mm-hmm. We don't show our ass online, hopefully, too much.
And it's a great point, because much what has prevailed in our modernized interpretation of yoga is this kind of, I think it stemmed mainly, possibly also from The Secret and that whole life affirmative, positive affirmative, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
But if
law of attraction stuff.
Yeah, law of attraction stuff. If it's taken too far beyond the kind of intended entry level motivational side, people burn out like crazy from trying to maintain just positive energy, just being positive, because they feed into that illusion that if I think anything negative, that's going to manifest, and I got to be perfect. So there was a movement, and there still is, of got to be perfect, and you're speaking to that beautifully. Because, I've definitely viewed, I've experienced it myself. I bought into it a little bit, but then luckily came out the other side with a bit more, relaxed into my imperfections a bit more. But for a while there, I bought into it. Yeah. And a lot of people did, and a lot of people still have. And it can be really messy and fierce in a weird way, like the messiness you're talking of, like the spiritual kind of sandpaper and the grit of life. It's messy in a different way, like a suppressive, like you suppress the negative shit for long enough, it comes out in such a messy way. Do you think?
Or you hide it.
You hide it.
That's what we mostly do.
What about like the whole situation of priests, like swearing celibacy and like hiding and suppressing and stuffing down like sexual energy?
Yeah.
And like putting on this picture perfect kind of image, and then comes out in fucking messy ways. I mean, that's been massive.
Yeah, or just like in our yoga world where there's so much sexual energy, there's just like so much sexual energy. And because it's in denial, then it comes out in all these seedy ways. And then what it does is then it takes the teachings, and because again we don't have this obedience thing, like a Christian, they just have the Bible. That's the only teaching they have, and I think that there's a shortcoming in that too. But we have this thing where we get to pick and choose whatever we want. We can write our own Bible based on the teachings that are comfortable for us, and leave the uncomfortable
the cafeteria
ones
model
off. Yeah, like a smorgasbord. Yeah, it's like old country buffet is what we have here. And that's really dangerous, because we will choose the empowerment teachings. This is what's happened in the Neo-Tantra thing. This is what happened in the Anusara community. I was very close to that community in those days. Yeah. And that's what happened is we choose the empowerment teachings. We choose the teachings that unleash us and unleash our Kundalini, which is a very akin energy to sexual energy. We unleash ourselves. We empower ourselves. We take these non-dual teachings where there is no evil. There's just shades of like how you understand it. And we throw away all of the behavioral teachings and all of the moral teachings and all of the things that are telling us about restraint and discipline and all that because it's uncomfortable. And we're just setting ourselves up to be monsters. Literally, this is like in our Indian tradition, that's what Ravana, the demon of the Ramayana, was. He was a super powerful yogi that decided that that goodness was not part of the equation for him. And he just became super powerful, and then guess what gets powerful? His lust, his covetousness, his greed, his violence, his ugliness, his cruelty. And, so then we have this situation where that just seems like this whole perfection thing that we're not even going to relate to. So you have the teacher now in the teacher training doing their required Yoga Alliance, yoga philosophies, bullshit, empty segment. And they'll get to the yamas and the niyamas, or they'll, heaven forbid, look at something like the Bhagavad Gita, and they'll just take it and they'll like roll their eyes as they're teaching it. They'll say, well, this says, that we're not going to have even harmful thoughts. Even harmful thoughts cause problems. And they kind of roll their eyes. They're like, well, whatever. Next. We'll finish this and then we'll get back to the hip openers. Don't worry, guys. We're almost done with this, but I got to talk to you about satya. I got to talk to you about, not lying, really telling the truth to yourself. No, really. But whatever. And we roll our eyes and then we move on. And it's like, yeah, well, what about this trance dance? Let's get that on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like there's this piece where, but the thing is, God is good, and my Christian friends, the really hardcore ones, really are skitzed out by like New Age teachings and Eastern teachings. But I just really understand it that it's like God is good and God is fragrant. And we can smell God from a long way away. And different people catch that scent in different ways and then follow that scent. And, if somebody gets on the spiritual path, even in the most whatever way, superficial way, or this kind of unbalanced way that I was talking about before, if you live long enough, you will burn yourself up. And you will have to turn towards something deeper or give up.
Yeah, similar to what I just touched upon before. Yeah. People burning out from positivity.
Yeah.
Just being positive for too long.
Yeah.
You burn out from that.
Yeah. Or you have a family. I mean, if you really, like Ram Dass used to say, if you think you're enlightened, go visit your family. I would also say, if you think you're enlightened, have one of your own. Make some
it's
kids.
It's interesting because nearly every podcast chat I've had, possibly every, that has come up. Think you're enlightened, go hang with your family or go be with your parents.
But no, be with your kids. Like your parents, you could totally spiritual bypass your family of origin. I've done that. You can't do it with your own kids.
Well, with that being said, how is your family life, my man?
My family life is just a cauldron of spiritual love fire, where it spans the gamut. It spans the whole gamut, Stuart, of having me on my knees with gratitude, and just could not be more blissfully in love and feeling like I'm just living Dharma in such a deep way. It runs the gamut from that to being on my knees and just praying to God to give me an answer, to tell me what to do in this moment. Everything is crumbling right now. Please help me. To the other extreme, which isn't the hard moment. The other extreme is the numb moment, where I'm just standing there, sleep deprived. I've eaten their leftover macaroni and cheese. I'm dehydrated, and I'm just standing there in my kitchen rubbing my eyes being like, I believe God is there, and I know that I'll feel it again someday.
Yeah.
The whole gambit. But, speaking to what I spoke about before, being in a separated family, It's got massive challenges. They spend at least half the time with me, not a little bit more. And because of travel schedule, we spend big chunks together. And the culture at their mom's house is different than it is in my house, as far as the spirituality piece goes, especially. But the thing is, when we were together, as engaged as a father as I was, as I'm sure you are, I never got to be engaged with them the way that I am now. As hard as it can be on so many practical levels, I'm so grateful to be a single dad. Just a shout out to all the single dads out there. Not encouraging anyone to become a single dad. I'll just say, if you're in a relationship and you have kids, do whatever it takes. Call me. I'll counsel you. Get help. It's worth it. Staying together. This is not meant to be done alone. If you find yourself alone, it can be a beautiful thing. And as a single dad, I get to spend so much time with my kids that I never did before. And I have to consider everything on my side of the fence. Everything from all the practical stuff to also just the thing of in a way, I have to be mom and dad. Up until the point that we did our separation, I had a men's book come out, and I was very invested in men's work and conscious masculinity. And I was very into cisgendered masculine presentation and what I was into in my life. And it was almost like instantly I just found myself having to go back into deep feminine and be able to have almost that Shankar Gauri, that image of Shiva and Shakti. They're actually one being, half male and half female in some cases, because when they're with me, I have to be that nurturing presence as well as I do that protective and masculine presence. And I mean, we're all fluid with all that anyway in our modern families, but I'm really grateful for that. And just so grateful that I spend so much time and so much quality time with both of my kids at this young age. Yeah. And man, your daughter is just 4, she's just 5 now. In my experience, from 5 to 6 was a huge leap in the ego. They even talk about it. When the kids start losing their teeth and getting their new teeth, it's this psychically developmental stage. And, I'll get in fights with my son now that are real fights, real ego to ego. And, I just am afraid, is this fight the beginning of his heroin addiction when he's 15? Am I blowing it right now? Am I turning him against, am I father wounding him impermanent, forever? There's that kind of jeopardy involved. That again, I am so grateful to have God in my life the way that I have now, because I can just go to God and just be like, God, I am so imperfect. I'm an imperfect teacher. I'm an imperfect father. I'm an imperfect human being. And I'm here, and I trust that you, God, have a perfection, and that these are your kids, and tell me what to do. I got in a fight with Jackson the other night. That's my son. And it was just going worse and worse. He is a strong little being. And he was not backing down. And I was not backing down either. And it didn't feel dharmic for me to back down either. It was one of these things where at a certain point you were asking about the no thing. I think at a certain point kids really have to know their limits, and they have to know that their father is there to be their father, and that at a certain point they're the boss. So it didn't feel dharmic for me to back down, and he wasn't backing down. And I literally just went out to the other room and just prayed out loud, with tears. God, I don't know what to do right now. Help me. Put the right words in my heart. Put the right love in my hands. Help him, because I could hear him crying in his room. My daughter, later, she was like, who were you talking to? Was somebody here? I heard you talking to somebody. And I said, no, I was praying. I was talking to God. And, I got an answer. It wasn't like, go and do this. Sometimes I'll get an answer like that. But it was just like, just get back in there. It was just almost like God was like my boxing coach in the corner for a second. And he put some water in my mouth and took the sweat out of my eyes and just said, get back in there. And I just went back in there and my heart was stilled in that moment of connection. And I just put my hands on him and I just said, look, I love you. And I said, do you want to come upstairs and sleep with us upstairs? And he was like, he didn't answer, but I could tell it was yes. I said, all we need to do, I just need to hear you say, Dad, I'm sorry. Thank you for taking me. I had taken him to a football game. Thank you for taking me to the football game. I'm sorry. That's all that needs to happen. And this is done. And I'll never say another word about it. And he just, I heard, that kind of hyperventilating. And he's like, Dad, I'm sorry. And he says, just like that, thank you for taking me to the football game. And he came into my arms and he just broke down, not in separation pain, but in that love sobbing. Mm-hmm. And I sobbed with him and I took him in my arms and I took him upstairs. And that was all God. That was God sending me back in there. That was me knowing that I needed to just get out of my own head and reach towards something higher. But that was also God's modeling to me, because that's how God is with me. Mm-hmm. No matter how stupid I get, how lost I get, how whatever, all that I have to do is just be like, okay, I'm going the wrong way. Let me turn around. Thank you for my blessings. I'm sorry for my stupid choices. Can I come back? And the answer is always those arms that break down from separation into love, into always. And so it was that modeling too. And so that's not easy. I guess there's part of me that would rather have his mom putting him to bed and I'm in the other room writing my next bestseller, or counting my money or whatever. I don't know, whatever. There's part of me that would like to have an easier situation, but man, I said a long time ago, God, I am your servant. Said this when I was 21 years old. I was in college and I was watching this video of Mother Teresa, another Christian. It was funny. Once I started looking at Christ, I realized that Christians were always huge influences on me, along with all the beautiful, tantric teachers and, teachers of the Eastern path. But I was watching a video of Mother Teresa holding this little baby that was suffering so bad. And it just occurred to me at the time, how could I choose anything else? I could choose to be I was an art student at the time. I could make art. I could be a cool person. I could have money. I could enjoy the world, or I could be a vehicle for God's love on earth to people who need it. And at that moment, it erased every other possibility. And I just said, God, I am your servant. I am your person. If I'm not the person you want me to be, make me the person you want me to be, no matter what it takes. Every breath I spend, every day that I live in this life, I want to serve you. I want to serve your love and help people. And, I tell my students now, I warn them about that prayer. Right. And I say, this prayer might come up in you, but whatever you do not pray that prayer.
Be careful what you wish for.
Do not pray that prayer. Pray every other prayer. Pray, God, give me a good life. Pray, God, take away my obstacles. God, give me lots of, time in tropical oceans. But, that prayer, be ready. But since I have given that prayer and then I'm in a moment like that where, I don't know how I'm going to pay for the next thing. I don't know how I'm going to get through the next argument with my co-parent. I don't know how things are going to work out for these kids. And all of that is so heavy on my heart. But man, oh man, it just presses me into my relationship, my walk with God in such an intimate way. and teaches me about service. So then, I'm different with my students. I'm different with myself. And, that's the contract that I signed. Whether or not it's always the easiest contract is another question. But yeah, family is good for that.
And grace can be fierce.
Grace can be really fierce. Mm-hmm. Really fierce. And, I'm sitting here talking about arguing about saying thank you for a football game. There are parents out here listening and their kids are in the hospital or their kids are in the graveyard. And so it's not lost on me that I have very high class problems. I lead a privileged, blessed life in so many ways. So just if anybody out there is really in some serious fierce grace, I've been there too. But in this moment, I'm not there, but I know that you're there.
Yeah, I was just speaking with Govindas the other day, and it was a very similar conversation, him being a father of two as well.
Yeah.
He was speaking of that same thing, being with this wild boy, needing to wrestle him down. And he's got a very similar energy to you, a very gentle, masculine, a very loving man, yet was exercising that fierce love, that fierce grace of sometimes you just gotta wrestle it down. And when it's done with love, I mean, that's where it's at. So thank you so much for sharing so candidly and so honestly. I think that's really helpful for not just parents, but anyone. Yeah. Because it's all relative. Challenges are relative to your own experience, we say, that's like first world problem. But I think it kind of feels the same.
It does.
Even if it's a really raucous problem.
It does.
One could have very minor problems, like trying to make it to an appointment, to their hair appointment. And that feels equally stressful. It's weird. It's weird that. But that stress response can feel just as gnarly as something actually stressful. So
one difference that I want to echo, I just heard Marianne Williamson speak the other night down here. She's just an amazing teacher and I feel like an incredible elder in our world that we all need to be listening to in this moment in time. Marianne Williamson. But she was talking about trauma. And she was talking about how modern people are so hung up by trauma and disabled by trauma. And she said, the people that marched across the bridge in Selma, they were like the people in Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. She said, don't you think they were probably traumatized? She said the suffragettes, the women that were trying to get the vote for women, when they were force-fed in prison, they were probably traumatized too. And she's like, we can still keep doing our hard work even when we're traumatized. And oftentimes it's almost part of the thing. So I just want to echo that too, because that's a piece in our world that we've learned to not stick trauma in the spiritual bypass drawer, which is good. But then also we sometimes elevate it partly because we don't have God. So all these other things take the throne of God, including our trauma. But, there's a Christian bumper sticker that says stop telling God how big your storm is and start telling the storm how big your God is.
Right. That's a great bumper sticker.
It's great, right? And it's that's the thing. It's if we don't have anything that is superior to our trauma, then our trauma becomes really superior.
Amazing. I'm just doing a quick time check to make sure I can get Soleil.
You got to check me. I'm just going to talk.
No,
and talk
it's
as long as
amazing.
You have this mic in front of my face.
Yeah, and I think there's a common assumption in the spiritual community that one needs that huge hurdle, that huge bump of ferocity, of challenge, in order to awaken. So the kind of flip of what we were talking about before, of positive obsession, narcissism, all that, and a common assumption that we need absolute shit to hit the fan for us to wake up. And it seems neither is, they're two polarities of the same kind of predicament. Yet until we've experienced either the burnout or the fierce grace, the challenge.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite be magnified or revealed that we can just relax into God. It doesn't have to be so freaking fierce or...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And stay. I mean, that's the thing.
Right.
The thing that kills both of those is longevity on the path. Because if you stay on the path for a season, anything, you can do anything for a season. But if you stay on the path for years and through seasons of your life, all of that stuff really works itself out if you stay. The other thing Marianne said, she said, we exercise our physical muscles and make our physical muscles stronger so that we can move better. We exercise our inner muscles, our spiritual muscles, so we can stay better.
Yeah.
So that we can not be moved. I was like, hallelujah. That is such a cool teaching.
Yeah, and like you said, it takes longevity. That type of growth and development, that kind of, you could say, horizontal, integrative embodiment of everything we're talking about. Sorry for all the noise, guys. And I hope everyone's okay. Is that an ambulance or a fire engine?
It's an ambulance. We're in the urban jungle of Santa Monica,
we're right
California.
in Santa Monica.
They're going to come right up the road. Oh, it's a fire department. Blessings to the firefighters.
We're right on the street in Santa Monica. It's a beautiful sunny day here. We're blessed, but I hope they are okay. And you're right in the vibes with David and I, with Harshada and I. So I hope you're enjoying the noise in our conversation. But what was I just touching upon there?
Talking about longevity and the horizontal.
Right. So what Joe and I have been talking quite a bit about, and some students have been inquiring with us, is their kind of peak experience that they've had, often with a plant medicine of late, like the psychedelic realm, which has its blessings and its curses. And I'm just listening to the conversation for now. I've got pros and cons for it, which I don't think, that could be a whole podcast in itself. Yeah. But what a lot of people are sharing about is
5 years from now, all the answers will be there.
Yeah.
But
it's very new right now. But this predicament of like, okay, I've been practicing for 10 years now, and I feel like my wheels have been spinning, like no huge mystical experience, no huge breakthroughs, but that have been apparent, that have been like cosmic or whatever. But then I did this ceremony and had my head blown open, and I felt connection with God and love and spirit through the ayahuasca, through the cactus, through the LSD, which in part is legitimate. It can really cut through our bullshit, cut through our layers of mind, cut through our ego, and reveal the deep aspects of our true nature and God and everything good. But that predicament that they face of like, okay, this happened in a moment, like one night, one day, one ceremony. But what about all those 10 years that I've been practicing? And we often come to the advice, you could say, of like, okay, you just had a peak experience. You could call that like a vertical peak mystical experience, a breakthrough, which is beautiful. But it's that longevity, as you said, that years and years of practice and grinding and breaking through and releasing, that's going to help you integrate that breakthrough. Because we're actually seeing a lot of people with the psychedelics being their primary path, which can be done. We saw Ram Dass do it, but then he came to the crossroads, the predicament of like, okay, well, now what? Because then now what? It can be a path. But then if it's just vertical, like cosmic expansion, often if it's not mixed with the you could say grueling like battlefield of bringing it back into the human experience, often the spiritual bypass and even like a bitterness or dullness tends to build up. So because it's a reoccurring conversation, I just thought it'd be good for us to kind of speak to it.
Lord have mercy, don't get me started. I mean, there's so many things that I want to say, but just since we're talking about Ram Dass asked his guru about this. He asked Neem Karoli Baba about this, and he asked if the drugs, the plant medicine, whatever,
that was LSD at the time,
and mushrooms and stuff like that, if that was a legitimate path, and what Neem Karoli Baba said, his guru, he said, you can take it and see Christ. He even talked about Christ. He said, you can take the drugs and see Christ, but you can't take the drugs and become Christ. That's like that's the basic answer for me.
Yeah.
And then he went on to say, if you really want to get high, try feeding people.
Yeah.
That was the next thing he said. Yeah. But so there's a couple things in that. I mean, that's one of the things. And so I actually got to ask Ram Dass this many years ago. We were somehow we were talking about the fact that I'm sober. I stayed sober when I got sober in those days. And so I got to ask him, I said, so many of my students, they know that, you're my teacher, and they also know that, I ate more acid than I did ding-dongs when I was in high school. Ding-dongs are like...
What a ding-dong.
Ding-dongs are like... Sorry. Yeah, well, I didn't mean to say it like that. Ding-dongs are like these chocolate donut things. It's like American junk food. It also is a word for the male organ.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but that's not what I meant. Rewind, clip, and action. So I took a lot of drugs when I was in high school before I got sober, and it was a spiritual experience for me too. So I asked Ram Dass, I said, a lot of people, they know my story and they know that you're my teacher. And they wondered, if they haven't taken acid before, should they? If they haven't, ayahuasca wasn't quite the soup du jour at that time. This is quite a few years ago. And I said, so let me ask you, what do you think? And he was like, he has a speech impediment, but he was like, I want to know what you tell them. And I said, I tell them that they don't need it. And he said, yeah. He said, they don't need it. He said, they're already beyond that. Your students are already beyond that. Mm. He said, if somebody is very closed psychologically and they approach the experience with someone who knows how to specifically guide them, it can be really good. So that was Ram Dass's answer, which I thought was really cool. Mm-hmm. And, and it's the same kind of thing. It's like, yeah, if somebody's really closed, like I have a Christian friend who, never did anything like that. And then somehow ended up in an ayahuasca ceremony. And he had this whole vision of the undifferentiated, unified vision of Christ. And it totally changed his relationship with Christ, that then he could pick back up in his practice. Mm-hmm. A lot of the people out here in Southern California, it's a culture where they will just take the ayahuasca every month or every time that they get a chance to. And that's cool. I mean, that's, they're not necessarily doing anything bad. But as far as spiritual development goes, two things. And I'm going to step on some toes here.
Step away. One
of the things is if I get even kind of close to those folks that's their main practice, or like even somebody that just smokes a lot of cannabis, but especially the ayahuasquero people, generally they're very self-absorbed people. Generally, that's a huge generalization, but just generally speaking, that's one of the side effects that I notice. And there's also a kind of a weird dark energy around them. Mm-hmm. If you have kind of a mystical vision, just like a regular mystical vision, and you can kind of see light and like see auras and stuff like that. When I see a group of those folks around, there's kind of a dark energy around it. And I don't totally know what that's about, but, I don't see it being something where people are really thriving spiritually over time when they're doing that. And I have heard of lots of examples, like my friend who really were like cracked open, either by that or even cracked open by a tragedy. I've worked with military veterans. They got cracked open in combat. But it's just something that cracks through the persona and the ego for a moment that lets that light of God shine through. Can be very useful, but it's so addictive. It's so tempting to, if you could just like drink something and go through the hardship of vomiting and whatever, and then have this like fantastic mystical vision, why would you practice the yamas and niyamas and all this kind of stuff? All right. So that's the one part of the answer. But the other part of it is I think that people have really lame spiritual practices for the most part. I think people have only began to tap into the mystical power of spiritual practice. That there's just, I think that it is grueling and super boring, especially meditation. I'm known mostly as a meditation teacher. Most people's meditation practice is so boring. I would die if I did that practice. Sit there and count your breath until you get distracted and then start over. I mean, my life is too short for that. When I'm meditating, I'm sitting there and I'm just saying, okay, here's me, there's God. What's in between us? How can we dissolve it? How can I come into a moment of communion with God as fast as possible, as deep as possible, and then take as much of that with me when I'm done as possible? That's what my meditation is. That's what I teach in my meditation too, when I train teachers. And, from that to even, some of these practices like kirtan and stuff like that, it's become this kind of like a sing-along or like a musical performance where we're just trying to see how rockin' the band can be. And then we get up and we rock and roll with the band because the band is rocking and rolling. But like, you could take a practice like kirtan and, you could sit in a temple in India with some old toothless man in a harmonium chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Rama off key. And if you go into that, man, you can just dissolve yourself into the ocean of bliss. It's a very, very mystical practice. It has nothing to do with jumping and dancing and clapping. And I don't know if any Christians are going to listen to this, but like, it's the same thing in the Christian world too, where, there are, I went to this church when I was home. I went to a black church. It's the only way to describe it. Any of the people there would feel completely comfortable with me describing it that way. I'm not being racist. It was a traditional black Pentecostal service. And it was just, when people were moved, they shout. They stand up, not because it's like it's time to stand up. They shout when the Spirit moves them to their feet and they have permission to do that. And the preacher, as he's preaching the word, he also has permission to let himself be seized by the Holy Spirit, and it let him interrupt his talk. And it was so awesome. And then in the musical part, you could get up and dance and run. People just run around the church.
What do you sorry to cut you off. What do you see that's different between that and the kirtan shenanigans of dancing and
Well, it can be the
clapping?
same. It can be the same thing where people just do that to just because that's what you're expected to do. In this particular one, it was just like this small little church. It was just kind of a miracle that I was there to begin with. But, compare that sort of a thing to like the boring kind of, Presbyterian or Catholic hymn singing or, now it's time to kneel. Now it's time to stand. So just saying that like for every spiritual seeker, I think that we have to go for the blood. Like we have to go for the deep part. We have to go beyond the surface of the practice, whatever it is, and get to the internal guts of it. And there are almost no good systems to teach you to do that. It's almost always a secret teaching. Like you have to know how to get it. And I can get it anywhere. I can walk into the Catholic church up the street and get that blood. I can go to the cheesy kirtan here in LA that's just like so cheesy and seems so ego-y and whatever, and I can get it there too. Not because I'm so great, but just because I'm so desperate. And for me, unless I tap into that mystical part of it, I just feel like I wasted my time. And there can be seasons in practice, as you said, that do feel grueling, that do feel dry. But those dry seasons shouldn't last long. If those dry seasons last, change up your practice. Like like it can take a minute sometimes in training to kind of get through the tedium.
Yeah. But
the practice shall not become the tedium. If it's like that, you wouldn't do that with anything else. You wouldn't keep going. You wouldn't keep watching a TV series that was boring.
Yeah.
And we need to have the empowerment, the autonomy, to use the word that you had earlier. And that's what yoga is so much about, to really be able to like customize our practice, not in a way that avoids all the dark things that we need to face, but customize our practice in a way that makes it juicy enough for us to go after those dark things in a way that doesn't feel grueling.
Yeah, again, it seems like a fine line, a balance.
It's a narrow path.
There's the kind of smorgasbord model that we spoke of, that I touched upon, of like, we could tailor make our sadhana, everything delightful, and avoid the gruel, or look at it from a masochistic point of view and just grunt our way through it. It seems like a middle path of both enduring the challenging aspects of it. At the same time, it can be juicy and joyful and fun. And
totally. And just making sure that you find that. And that's what's so important about community too. It's like having like soul friends and soul people and having love. Yeah.
Harshada, we could keep going for hours.
Yeah, man.
I got to take Soleil to school. Come here, Soleil. Come say hi to
Soleil.
Harshada and everyone.
We've got a gorgeous, shining 5-year-old example of God's glory right here, right now.
It's been an absolute delight chatting with you, Harshada.
Definitely, Stuart.
Can you share your platforms? People can contact you by.
You can find me on Instagram at David H. Wagner. That's a one-stop shop for that'll get you into my website and all that kind of stuff. You can find me on YogaGlo along with Stuart's beautiful wife. Come find me on Instagram and get involved. And before we finish, I also just want to say, Stuart, keep up the good work, because I'm talking to Stuart. He's got his daughter on his lap, and I just want to say that Stuart is one of these teachers in our world right now that is actually taking on the role of an elder, in the sense that he's taking care of not just his thing, not just his people, but kind of being a steward of the path. And I want to commend you for that, and keep up the good work. Keep up the good work on this podcast.
Thank you so much.
It's been a really inspiring, uplifting time to spend with you.
So good to be with you. And you've got this India retreat coming up.
Yeah.
A few spaces left.
Spaces. I don't know when this is coming out. When is this coming out?
And hopefully up in a few days.
Oh, yeah. So middle of January, it's a 12-day trip to India with like 10 or 12 people besides myself. And we go talk about getting the blood. That's all we do. We don't go to the Taj Mahal. We don't take a picture on an elephant. We don't also get sick or do any of the other crap that people do when they're there. We don't go to the beach in Goa.
Going deep.
We go in deep.
Okay.
Deep. So you'll find that on my Instagram too.
So good to be with you. Thank you for driving all the way from Ojai here.
My pleasure.
Much love.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. God bless
Bye for
everybody.
now.
Be good.